It was supposed to be a day of love. Red roses sat untouched on the kitchen counter. A heart-shaped balloon bobbed gently against the ceiling, tethered to a child's plastic chair. Somewhere in the background, a greeting card had fallen open. The words "Forever Yours" scrawled in ink that was still drying. But in the early hours of February 14th, inside a quiet suburban home, gunshots broke the silence. 5. Sharp, deliberate, each one echoing louder than the last. The neighbors didn't hear screams, just silence after the shots. By the time officers arrived, the man was lying on the floor of his daughter's bedroom, his blood soaked into the cartoon-themed carpet. His wife stood nearby, weapon still in hand. Her badge hung from a lanyard around her neck. Her eyes were fixed on the child, not with rage, not with remorse. Something else, something harder to name. The dispatcher's call had come in calm and controlled. Shots fired. Officer involved. We have one down. But nothing about what they would find felt calm or controlled. The woman who had pulled the trigger wasn't just a cop. She was one of their own. A veteran officer, sharpshooter, commended for restraint under pressure. Known in the department for her quick wit, her precision, her devotion to the badge. She didn't try to run. She didn't ask for a lawyer. She just stood there and said, "I caught him." With her, 8 years old, their only child, the case was sealed tight before the crime scene. Tex even zipped the body bag. But what led to this moment was anything but clear. Friends called them a perfect family. Officers who had served with her said she adored her husband. He was a high school math teacher, well-liked, deeply respected, the type who volunteered for school plays and after-school tutoring. But beneath the surface of their carefully crafted life, something had been quietly decaying. There were no prior reports, no history of domestic disputes, no whispers at the precinct, and yet on the most romantic day of the year, she'd fired 5 rounds into the man she once vowed to protect and cherish. 1 shot to the chest, 2 to the shoulder, 1 to the leg, and the final one, directly through the heart. What pushed a disciplined officer to commit such an act inside her own home? Why that day? Why in front of their daughter? And most of all, what exactly did she see? This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't about jealousy. And it wasn't random. This was a reckoning, one that had been waiting quietly, just out of sight, for far too long. And once it was set in motion, there would be no turning back. She was the kind of woman people trusted. Neighbors described her as reserved but polite, the type who always waved but never lingered in conversation. At school functions, she stood at the back of the room, alert, composed, never missing a detail, never drawing attention. Her uniform fit her like armor, but even out of it, she carried herself like she belonged to a different world, a world of order, of control. Her name was Officer Nina Harper. 12 years on the force, commendations in her file, no disciplinary actions. Her record read like a checklist of reliability. Her superiors praised her professionalism. Her colleagues called her sharp by the book, dependable in crisis. She was a wife, a mother, a protector, and yet in the early hours of Valentine's Day, she became something else. What drove her to step out of that role, to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed? The answer, it turns out, wasn't hidden in her record. It wasn't something you'd find in files or photographs. It was buried much deeper, in silence, in routine, in the quiet spaces between smiles and obligations. Nina and her husband, Marcus, had been married for 9 years. By all outward appearances, their life was steady. Middle class, respectable, 2 incomes, 1 child, a modest home and a clean neighborhood. Nothing out of place. But Nina didn't talk much about Marcus, even to her closest colleagues. He was a math teacher at a nearby private school. Quiet too. Friendly, intelligent, with a calm demeanor that made students feel safe. They met in college. She was studying criminal justice. He was finishing a degree in education. Their courtship was quick. Quiet dinners, weekend study sessions, matching goals. They moved in together less than a year later. Married within 2, they were the kind of couple people don't question. There were no screaming matches, no nights spent apart, no bruises, no threats. Just the kind of invisible distance that doesn't make a sound until it breaks something. Over time, Nina's colleagues began to notice subtle changes. She started arriving early, staying later, volunteering for shifts no one wanted. She claimed it was ambition, but there were moments, brief, often unnoticed, where something would flicker behind her eyes, like she was calculating, bracing. She never brought her daughter to the station, never mentioned birthdays or holidays. But when asked, she always smiled and said things were fine, always fine. No one thought to question her, not until the morning she radioed in those words, "Subject is down, I've discharged my weapon." Even then, her voice was calm, steady, trained. But later in the interview room when the recorder was off, she repeated the same sentence 3 times. "He was touching her. I saw it. He didn't even stop." Those words would hang in the air for days. But not everyone believed her. Some thought she snapped. Others believed there was more to the story. A deeper betrayal, a long-held suspicion that had finally taken shape. But the truth, the real truth, was still out there, just beyond reach, waiting. She was found curled up in her bed, eyes wide open, the covers pulled up to her chin like a shield. The air in the room was thick, not just from the smell of blood, but from something heavier. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She just kept whispering one thing. "Mommy shot Daddy." Her name was Ava, 8 years old, a third grader who loved puzzles, pink hair clips, and her stuffed rabbit named Boots. In pictures, her smile was soft and shy, always tilted to one side. In video clips, her voice was high and careful, like she was always asking permission to exist. She hadn't moved from the bed when first responders arrived. Her hands trembled, but her body stayed still, like she had been waiting for someone to come and lift the weight from her chest. What exactly she witnessed that night would take months to piece together. And even then, the full picture never quite came into focus. But here's what we know. The incident happened just after midnight. Nina was home early, an unusual break from her routine. Ava was supposed to be asleep, but the lights were on in her room. The door was slightly ajar. Nina stepped inside and didn't speak. She didn't shout. She didn't ask questions. She fired 5 rounds before her husband hit the floor. The forensics later confirmed it. She didn't hesitate between shots. There was no pause, no warning. Whatever she saw, it had already made up her mind for her. Ava didn't run. She didn't try to stop her mother. She didn't scream. When they asked her what happened, her answers came in fragments. "He told me not to tell. I didn't want to do the game. He said it was love. Mommy said it was bad." Words that felt too old for someone so young. Words that never should have been spoken in a child's bedroom. Investigators knew what they were hearing. The red flags were there, buried in the cadence of a child trying to make sense of something too large to understand. But building a case on the words of an 8-year-old was complicated, traumatic, dangerous. So they called in specialists, interviewers trained to sit low, speak gently, and peel back the layers one at a time. What they found was enough to hold the story in place, but not enough to make it stick in court. No cameras, no medical reports, no prior complaints, only the words of a mother with a gun and a child too scared to sleep. Still, the questions grew louder. Had Nina suspected this for a while? Had Ava tried to tell her before and been ignored? Or was it all a tragic misunderstanding? A mother projecting shadows where there were none? The truth was tangled, but one thing was clear. From that night forward, Ava Harper would never be the same, and neither would anyone who stepped foot inside that house. The house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, framed by manicured lawns and motion sensor porch lights. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened, where you could leave your doors unlocked and wave at passing cars, certain you'd know the driver by name. But that night, everything changed. Inside, the air was cold. Not from the weather, the heater was still running, but from something else, something that couldn't be adjusted by a thermostat. Investigators moved carefully through the hallway, cameras flashing with every step. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass. Everything remained where it should have been, except for Marcus. He was found near the foot of his daughter's bed, one hand stretched toward her blanket, the other clutching his chest. His eyes were open, frozen mid-expression. Something between shock and something else no one could quite name. Nina's service weapon lay on the floor by her feet. She hadn't bothered to wipe it down. She hadn't tried to stage a story. When the responding officer asked her what happened, she simply said, "He was touching her." I had to stop him. There was no trace of blood in the hallway. No evidence of a struggle. Everything had happened in that room. The smallest in the house. Painted lavender with decals of stars on the ceiling. The mattress had a single drop of blood near the edge. Investigators noted that it didn't match the trajectory of the shots. It had come after. Perhaps from a wound, perhaps from contact. The closet door was half open. Inside were rows of dresses, school uniforms, a box of puzzles stacked neatly on the top shelf. The more they looked, the quieter the house became. It wasn't just what they found. It was what they didn't find. No alcohol, no drugs, no signs of recent argument or chaos. The table was still set for a Valentine's dinner that never happened. Chicken parmesan in the oven, a bottle of unopened red wine, candles unlit. Time had stopped mid-motion, like something had interrupted it without warning. Evidence text bagged everything. The Valentine's Day card addressed to "My Two Loves." Marcus's phone left on the couch. Nina's badge still clipped to her belt. Each piece telling a part of the story, but none of them answering the question that kept circling. What exactly did she see? Nina never once asked what would happen to her. She never requested a lawyer, never cried. But when they escorted her out of the house, past the neighbors now gathered behind yellow tape, she looked back at the window of her daughter's room. Just once. And in that moment, her expression shifted. Not to guilt, not to fear, but to something almost hollow. Whatever happened in that room had ended more than a marriage. It had pulled something out of her. Something that may never return. The room was plain. 4 walls, 1 table, 2 chairs. A recording light blinked steadily in the upper corner, red against gray. Nina sat without handcuffs. That was standard procedure for officers. Even in custody, there was a level of respect, or perhaps caution, extended to their own. Her posture was straight, hands resting on her thighs, her badge still visible beneath the collar of her coat. The detective across from her had worked dozens of these cases. Officer-involved shootings, domestic disputes turned deadly. But this was different. Not because of the blood or the victim, but because of her silence. She had confessed, not with emotion, not with desperation, but like someone reciting a fact. "He touched my daughter. He did it again." She wouldn't elaborate, not without prompting, but she also didn't deny a single detail. The questions came slow at first. "When did you find out?" "I saw it." "Are you sure about what you saw?" Her answer never changed. "I know what I saw." But there were holes, gaps in the timeline that didn't add up. Nina claimed she came home early from her shift, said she had a feeling something wasn't right, that her daughter had been different lately, quiet, withdrawn, flinching when touched. But she never filed a report, never mentioned suspicions to anyone. No texts, no journal entries. Nothing that pointed toward a mother unraveling or preparing for confrontation. The detective pressed harder. "Did Ava tell you something? Did you walk in on something?" Nina's jaw clenched. "He was on the bed with her. His hand was under the blanket. He didn't stop when I opened the door. He looked at me and didn't move." Those words held weight, enough to pause the questioning, enough to make even a seasoned detective lean back and take a breath. But still, there were no witnesses, no physical evidence. And Marcus had no history, no complaints, no quiet whispers in teacher lounges or behind closed doors. His record was clean, his background spotless, and yet Nina didn't flinch. "He told her it was a game," she said softly, "that Mommy would be mad if she ruined the surprise." Her voice cracked only once. "He said it was love." That sentence changed the room. The detective's pen slowed. The lights seemed to buzz louder, but it still wasn't enough. Without corroboration, without physical proof, they couldn't call it justice, only murder. And Nina? She didn't beg. She didn't explain further. She simply sat in her chair, fingers folded neatly, eyes fixed on the wall behind the glass. I protected her, she said. I'm the only one who would have. That was her last statement before the lawyers arrived, before the silence settled. In again, this time under legal advisement, but those words would echo, not just through the precinct, but through the entire town. By morning, the headlines hadn't reached the national news, but the town already knew. They always know before the sirens stop echoing. The whispers started at the diner, where regulars huddled over black coffee and theories. Then at the gas station, the pharmacy, the school parking lot. Each conversation a variation of the same stunned question. Did you hear what happened to Marcus Harper? By noon it had a rhythm, a hum behind closed doors, behind polite smiles. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had the facts. Some blamed Nina, said she'd lost her mind, said the job had hardened her, made her paranoid, dangerous. Others weren't so sure. She's not the type to snap, said one neighbor. She's calm, always has been. She never smiled much, said another, but she wasn't cold, just focused. But the undercurrent was clear. People wanted answers. They wanted to understand how something like this could happen here, in a place where lawns are trimmed on Sundays and children ride bikes till the streetlights flicker on. At Ava's school, the whispers were quieter, but heavier. Teachers held emergency meetings. Parents questioned administrators. Had there been signs? No one could say. No bruises, no complaints, no behavioral red flags strong enough to raise alarms. Ava was quiet, yes, but respectful, smart, obedient, the kind of child who colors inside the lines and always waits her turn. The school counselor reviewed her file. Nothing stood out. No incidents. No outbursts. And yet, some began to recall small things. A teacher remembered Ava asking if secrets could be bad, even when they were fun. Another remembered her changing during gym class with the stall door locked. Small things, easy to overlook, easier to dismiss. But in hindsight, they began to glow with a new kind of weight. Back at the station, Nina was no longer Officer Harper. Her name had shifted, no longer behind a badge, but under a charge. Murder in the second degree. Still, the district attorney hesitated. Something about the case made it hard to push forward. The child was traumatized. The mother wasn't talking. The evidence, though damning, carried an uncomfortable edge of possibility. Could it be true? Could a man like Marcus, respected, gentle, educated, have been hiding something behind those glasses and carefully ironed shirts? His colleagues at the private school refused to believe it. He was beloved, the principal said to reporters. We trusted him with our students. He volunteered for everything, tutored struggling kids after hours. He was kind. But kindness doesn't leave fingerprints. And the more people talked, the more they avoided saying his name out loud. Like it had become contaminated. The town didn't know who to protect. The mother, the child, the man now buried under suspicion and 5 bullets. Truth had become slippery, and in that silence, the one after the gossip fades but before the truth stands up, something unseen waited, still and watching. Marcus Harper's funeral was closed casket. They said it was for the family's peace, but some quietly wondered if it was because no one wanted to look him in the face. The church pews filled quickly. Former students, colleagues, aunts, cousins, parents from Ava's school who had once sat beside Marcus during PTA meetings. Some cried softly. Others just stared forward, their faces unreadable. No one mentioned the charges. No one brought up the word that had begun to surface in quiet corners. Molestation. But it hung in the air anyway, heavy and waiting, like smoke that clung to clothes long after the fire. Marcus had been a respected man, a math teacher at a private Christian academy, Sunday school leader, little league coach. He brought cupcakes to class on birthdays. He always remembered names, always looked you in the eye. So when the news broke, most people didn't believe it. Couldn't. Not Marcus. He was the father who held Ava on his shoulders during fireworks shows, the husband who posted anniversary tributes online, the neighbor who returned lost dogs and shoveled snow for the elderly couple 2 houses down. But when the cracks appeared, they came quietly. A former student, now in college, mentioned how Marcus had once hugged her too long. Another girl said he often found reasons to keep her after class, even when there was no real reason to stay. None of them reported it at the time. It hadn't felt wrong back then. Just uncomfortable, confusing. But now, with what Ava may have seen, with what Nina claimed to have walked in on, those memories shifted, took on a new shape. Still, there was no proof, no documented complaints, no criminal record, only the whispers that gained volume with each passing day. Nina's defense attorney began to build a case on the image of the man, not the facts, because there weren't many facts, not yet. Only behavior, only assumptions, only the word of a mother whose world had snapped in half the moment she opened her daughter's door. The prosecution focused on intent. They claimed Nina had no right to act as judge and executioner, that even if her suspicions were true, she should have called it in, followed protocol, waited for evidence. But mothers don't wait when they believe their child is in danger. That was the story her legal team leaned on. A mother acting on instinct, on protection, not premeditation. But juries don't decide based on instinct. They decide based on what can be seen, measured, explained. And Marcus? He had left no confession, no journal, no camera, only his silence. In a town now divided between memory and truth, the version of him they thought they knew, and the version Nina believed she saw. They waited weeks before speaking to Ava. Trauma experts said it was necessary, that pushing her too soon might shatter what little stability she had left. But the longer they waited, the heavier the silence grew. She hadn't cried at the hospital, not when they took her from the house, not when they told her she wouldn't be going home again. She held her stuffed rabbit tightly and blinked at the officers like she was trying to understand a language no one had taught her. A child psychologist met with her in a softly lit room. No police badges, no uniforms, just puzzles, soft voices, and too much unspoken weight. "Can you tell me what happened that night?" the therapist asked gently. Ava looked down. Silence. "Did something happen that made Mommy upset?" A pause, then quietly, "He said it was a game." The therapist didn't move. Ava ran her fingers along the ear of her rabbit. She didn't make eye contact. Her voice was thin. "He said we had to practice before Valentine's." The room seemed to lose its shape for a moment. "What kind of practice, sweetheart?" She shrugged. "Like secrets. He said Mommy would be mad if I told. So I didn't." "Did he touch you?" Ava didn't answer. She looked past the adult, past the room, like something only she could see was floating just behind the wall. "He told me I was special." The words didn't come with tears, just a numb rhythm, like something she'd repeated to herself before. "Did Mommy see something that night?" Ava's grip on the rabbit tightened. Her legs swung slowly under the chair. She screamed, and he told her it wasn't what it looked like. That was all she said. She didn't describe more, didn't go into detail, but the tone of her voice, the stillness of her body, it told its own story. Later, the therapist would write in her report, "Ava displays signs consistent with exposure to grooming. Language suggests confusion, emotional numbing, and possibly suppressed memory recall. Further evaluation recommended." But there was no recorded confession, no hard evidence, nothing a courtroom could hold up without contest. And yet the weight of Ava's words was undeniable, not proof, but something close. Enough for some to believe, enough for others to question everything they thought they knew about Marcus Harper. When Nina heard the transcript, she didn't speak. She closed her eyes and her shoulders finally dropped, like she'd been holding her breath since the night the shots rang out. Still, belief isn't justice, and suspicion isn't conviction. And the court wouldn't take a child's vague recollection as a death sentence for a man with no prior offense. The case was shifting, no longer about guilt or innocence, but about interpretation. And behind every word Ava whispered, something waited in the dark, not gone, just hiding, hesitated. She became a name people said with a lowered voice, not out of hate, out of not knowing the jurors returned on the 4th. The courtroom was silent as Nina entered, not the kind of silence that shows respect, but the kind that waits, observes, measures. She wore a dark blazer, no makeup. Her badge no longer hung at her waist. She wasn't Officer Harper anymore. Just Nina, the woman who pulled the trigger, 5 times on Valentine's Day. The jury watched her closely. 12 strangers asked to decide whether what she did was vengeance or protection, rage or instinct, and they would do it without a confession from the man who died. The prosecution spoke first, calm, measured. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. Nina Harper took justice into her own hand, the district attorney said. She didn't call for backup. She didn't investigate. She executed. They leaned on the lack of physical evidence. No bruises on Ava, no DNA, no prior reports, no documented behavior from Marcus Harper to support the claim. All we have is her word, the DA continued, and a child's memory, shaped by trauma, fear, and suggestion. They showed photos of Marcus at his daughter's birthday, smiling, holding her hand. A father, not a threat. But then it was the defense's turn, and they didn't start with pictures. They started with silence, with a pause. Then, she saw her husband in bed with her child. The room held its breath. She didn't wait to ask why. She didn't analyze, she acted. They played Ava's recorded interview, the part where she said it was a game, where she said he told her not to tell. Some jurors shifted in their seats. Others looked away. The defense brought in psychologists, experts in grooming. They explained how abuse often hides behind kindness, how men like Marcus rarely leave marks, how victims, especially children, protect their abusers out of fear, love, or confusion. Still, it was all theory, emotionally charged. But without hard evidence, nothing could be certain. When Nina took the stand, she didn't cry. Her voice was even. "I opened the door," she said. "He was under the blanket with her. He looked at me, and he didn't move. Like he wasn't sorry, like he knew I couldn't prove it." She said she heard her daughter say, "Don't be mad, Mommy. We're playing Valentine." She said the gun was in her bag, still strapped from her shift. She said she didn't think. She just pulled it. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were no gasps, just more of that waiting silence, heavy, watching, because they still didn't know if she was a grieving mother or something else. The jury wouldn't be told what to feel, only what could be proven and what couldn't. But behind the polished shoes, the rehearsed statements, the stacks of files, something else lingered, a question no one dared ask out loud. What would you have done? Not with swift confidence, but with eyes that seemed dimmer than when they began. They filed in slowly, like people returning from someplace far, a place only they could understand. Nina stood. Her hands were clenched at her sides. She didn't blink. Her lawyer leaned in but said nothing. At this point, words couldn't help. The foreperson held the paper carefully, as though the weight of it might change if he gripped too tightly. "We, the jury, find the defendant," a pause, "not guilty of second-degree murder." The room did not gasp. No cheering, no collapse of relief. Just that same silence that had stalked every moment since Valentine's night. The judge nodded once, formal, distant, and just like that, it was over. But not really. Nina didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply lowered herself back into the chair, her shoulders trembling. Not from joy, but from something older. Something cold that had finally broken free. Outside the courthouse, the reporters descended like they always do. Microphones, questions, camera flashes. But Nina didn't stop to speak. She held her daughter's hand and kept walking. Through the crowd, through the noise. Ava didn't look at anyone, just at the ground, her rabbit tucked under her arm, now missing one eye. At home, lights flicked on in living rooms across town. TVs played back courtroom footage. Social media filled with opinions. Some sympathetic, others cruel. But the truth remained lodged in a place no broadcast could reach. No one could say with certainty what Marcus Harper did that night. And no one ever would. No charges. No trial for him. Only one woman's memory and one child's whisper. Some believed justice had been served. Others believed a man had been gunned down by a jealous wife too quick to judge. But neither group slept soundly. In small towns, verdicts echo long after the jury goes home. At the school where Marcus once taught, his office sat empty, locked. his nameplate removed, the walls repainted. But kids still walked a little faster past that door. At the station, Nina's desk remained untouched. Some officers cleared it out quietly. Others refused. "I don't know if I'd have done anything different," one officer said later. "But that doesn't make it right. It just makes it real." Nina never returned to the force, her badge stripped, her career over, but her daughter alive. And for her, that was the only outcome that mattered. Still, even in freedom, there's a shadow, neighbors whispered. Parents, where to put her? Hero? Killer? Something else? And in the house where it all ended, a light still flickers in the hallway at night. Nina never sleeps in the dark anymore. Not because she's afraid of what's outside, but because of what once stood just down the hall, behind a child's door. 2 months after the verdict, the Harper home went up for sale. It sat on a quiet street shaded by trees that dropped brittle leaves year-round. The kind of neighborhood where lawnmowers hummed on Saturday mornings and kids biked home before dusk. But now no one played near the corner lot anymore. No one lingered by the fence. Some believed the house was cursed. Others just didn't want to be reminded of what happened there, of what might have happened behind closed doors. The real estate agent didn't include details in the listing, just photos, clean rooms, fresh paint, stage furniture. But the bedroom that belonged to Ava, the one Nina had opened that night, remained empty in every shot. Ava, now 9, had stopped speaking to most people outside her mother. She still slept with the rabbit, still flinched when a door clicked shut too quickly. Her drawings changed. No more hearts, no sunshine faces. Now, just shapes, closed windows, locked boxes, figures standing alone. Nina enrolled her in therapy, homeschooled her for now, said it was temporary, said she just needed time. But time doesn't erase memory. And even though Nina was free, she lived like someone still waiting for something to end. At night, she sat on the back porch, the air thick and still. She kept the porch light on, one hand on her coffee mug, the other always resting near the edge of the table. The gun had been taken as evidence. She didn't replace it, but the habit of reaching for it remained. She didn't attend church anymore, couldn't bring herself to walk past the pew where Marcus once sat with Ava, resting on his lap. Old friends reached out, then stopped. Some didn't know what to say. Others said too much. The whispers followed her. She must have known before. Maybe it was jealousy. I heard there were problems in the marriage, but no one had sat in that hallway. No one had heard the breath catch in her chest. No one had seen the look in his eyes when she walked in. She didn't need them to believe her, but she couldn't forget that they didn't. Even her own mother had asked, "Are you sure?" There are wounds that bleed, and there are wounds that don't, the kind that stay hidden under skin and bone, quietly rotting. Marcus Harper's grave never saw fresh flowers. No one maintained it. No one spoke at his site. Just a simple headstone. Beloved father, teacher, son. Even in death, the truth hadn't been written, and that's what lingered. Not the shot, not the verdict, but the silence that remained after, because Nina could live with the guilt. What she couldn't live with was not knowing how much of it she actually deserved. Years passed, not loudly, not with milestones or applause, just the slow rhythm of days stacking on top of each other. Ava turned 11. She smiled more now, but only when she thought no one was looking. Her eyes still flicked to the corners of rooms. She still slept with the rabbit, now threadbare and barely holding together. She never asked about her father, not once, not even in passing. Nina never brought him up either. They lived in a smaller house, 2 towns over. Nothing remarkable. Beige siding, a modest yard, a neighborhood where no one recognized their names, or at least pretended not to. Ava had new teachers, new routines. Nina had a job at a local shipping office. Punch in, punch out. No badge, no uniform. Just quiet. Sometimes the quiet felt like peace, other times like punishment. The story never made national headlines. No books were written, no documentaries aired. It became one of those cases people mentioned briefly, without detail. "You remember that cop, the one who shot her husband?" And then the conversation would move on. But for Nina, it never moved. It stayed, in every shadow, in every creak of the floor when the house settled at night. She told herself she'd done what she had to, that she'd seen something no mother should ever have to see. But sometimes in the stillness before dawn, she wondered if she'd filled in gaps that weren't there, wondered if the truth had been in Ava's voice or in her own fear. Because the human mind is a powerful thing. It fills the silence. It draws conclusions. It protects. And sometimes it deceives. She never remarried, never dated. No one entered their world again. It was just the two of them, bound by blood in something else, something much harder to name. Ava asked questions about the world, about space, about oceans, about music, but never about Valentine's Day. Never about the red light from the patrol car that blinked outside their window as Nina led her out in pajamas, holding her too tightly. Never about the 5 shots, or what they meant. In time, Ava might forget the details. Children often do. But something else would remain, a shape, a feeling, a presence that lives just beneath memory, quiet but constant. Some nights Nina would find herself awake at 3 a.m., walking to Ava's door, pressing her hand gently to it, not pushing it open, just listening. And on those nights, she wouldn't hear crying. She wouldn't hear anything at all, just the quiet. And in that quiet, something else always waited, not guilt, not grief, but a question that no one would ever answer. And maybe, just maybe, that was the true sentence all along.